Hello everybody, my name is Ella Matthews and I am the creator of the Pandemic Podcast. I do hope you're well. So I am here today to discuss with you what the Pandemic Podcast is, what we've learned from the Pandemic Podcast, and hopefully some lessons going forward which we can all take from this project. So what is the Pandemic Podcast? So the Pandemic Podcast aims to broadcast student life during COVID-19. Now this is very raw, it's very honest. We've taken a variety of situations, whether that be people who were supposed to be on their year abroad, international students, first years. We've had a lecturer speak on the podcast, and essentially it is like collecting all of these stories and having them to look back on for what has been such a, I hate using this word, but unprecedented, strange, and hopefully never to be repeated time. So we wanted to use this as like an archive for being able to look back and think about the stories which happened during a pandemic, and these are stories of students. So how did the Pandemic Podcast come about? Not intentionally, and I think I just want to touch on this as sort of a project idea going forward for people who may want to start a project but feel afraid and don't know how. I think have sort of an idea of what you want to help first. So I went to my course leader and I said I was really worried about first year students. I said I know that my mental health in university for my first year was not great. Luckily I managed to find my people, but that was through putting myself in a situation, for example going to the gym, where I knew there'd be like-minded people, and that made it easier for me, but otherwise I did struggle. And I said I'm really worried about the first years because they're going to be in halls, they're going to be unable to speak to other people who perhaps like the same things that they do because of the lack of societies, and I don't know how they are going to make meaningful connections at university. And social health is so important for having good mental health. So I said I'm concerned, and I went to my course leader and I expressed this concern, and I said we need to find something to do where we can get people together and we can all work collectively on something, and then conversations can happen organically at the same time, and it's not forced, because forced friendships they're never perhaps the most sustainable and the most enjoyable. It can be quite an awkward situation to be put with people and be told to talk and have nothing really to go off apart from like, okay, you need to try and make friends now. It's really, really hard, and it creates sort of like that first date dynamic of trying to make friends when actually like making friends should be like a really enjoyable experience. So I said we need to do something where we are all working together, and this is a pandemic, and I think coming together and trying to form something collectively to help others can be a really great thing during this time. So I said, why don't we do something? And I was thinking just in the top of my head, I had no idea. I said, like a podcast, where we can come together and we can broadcast student experience, because as I said before, this is going to be a time which we look back on, and it would be really nice to have an archive of these experiences. And she was like, yes, that sounds fantastic, off you go and leave that project. And so just as I was speaking from before, I came with an idea of wanting to improve something. I didn't have everything set out. I didn't know I was going to do a podcast, but just from having the idea of wanting to help and being able to speak about it with someone and being able to take that idea seriously, I was able to produce something which has now led to this. So you do not have to have that idea fine-tuned. Ideas are never fine-tuned. You sort of like carve and create them as you go along. Okay, so then I went off and I thought, okay, this sounds like a good idea. I'm going to go and try and honour this idea. What can I do now? and it involved a lot of conversations, a lot of stuff which didn't work, sort of, you know, just trialing and erroring and not being afraid to get things wrong, and sort of holding your hands up and saying, like, I am new to this, and it'd be really nice if we can come together and work together. And I think by communicating just sort of like my inexperience of knowing how to edit online and how to like edit a podcast actually allowed for us all to come together and try to produce something collectively, because we're liberal arts students, you know, we're not in the business world, we're not in the media world. Amazingly now media students have come over, but to begin with we're all learning new skills, we're all very new to this process, which again made it all the more exciting. So I went off and I split people into groups based on either social media, editing, interviewing, interviewers, and I just sort of would see what happened. And that was all good, it was great, people were doing their stuff, but really, as I told you, sort of my aim to begin with, it was about being able to support what was first years, but then I soon realised because everyone was going through a really tough time during a pandemic, and I thought, what can I do for this group to make them feel supported? And at the time I was doing my level 2 counselling, mental health first aid. I'm now a mental health support worker, and I thought, sort of, how can I utilise these skills to support this group? So I decided that every 2 weeks we would have a meeting session where at the beginning we would just discuss how we're feeling. And I did this out of 10. I went around and I said, okay, everybody, I want you to just say how you are feeling out of 10. And then I would probably say, what have you been up to? And I might ask them like a really random question. Like, if you could go back to any era in time, what would it be? And it just opened up the conversations, and it allowed people to connect with one another and understand one another on a more colloquial basis before launching into academia. And I think this is something which I want to signpost here, is this ability to talk openly about, you know, your feelings, and do it in a way where it's very normalised. You know, we have a routine of going in and thinking the first bit of conversation, the first almost 30 minutes of conversation before we talked about anything to do with work, was about how each one of us are feeling. And I want to make a note of this because I think perhaps throughout education, the focus on well-being was never predominant. It was what I feel like was always about progressing and getting that next best grade and going on to either college or university. And the conversations happening where we were pulling up one another and just sort of like asking about how we're feeling, those conversations didn't necessarily happen. And it's one of the easiest things to do. And it's not asking someone, how you feeling? Yeah, I'm fine. Because anybody can give you the I'm fine answer. And in fact, Dr. Alex, who is now the mental health ambassador, is trying to get in a traffic light system within schools, where before every day he's asking people how they are feeling on the traffic light. So if it's green, it's really, really good. If it's amber, it's mediocre. And if it's red, it's not so good. And by doing this and having this sort of like conversation at the beginning of school, is introducing the fact that feelings should be spoken about constantly. And if we're trying to, you know, introduce the system of speaking about well-being to students at the age of 15, well, they're not going to do it if I haven't been taught to do it throughout their time in education. It's going to be a very intimidating and awkward feeling to be said, either to be asked, like, you know, how are you feeling on the traffic light system? It's very odd. But I guess my encouragement now to those who are listening and who are in education is to ask in the beginning of seminars, how are we all doing out of 10? Or how are we all doing on the traffic light system? And we don't have to say why you're feeling that way. We don't have to go into all of that. Personally, I went into that just because, you know, I wanted to see what people were doing within the pandemic, and also online it can be shown that people were having the best time ever, getting fit, baking all the banana bread, learning a new hobby, when in reality they're not great and they are really struggling. And that's why I wanted to say, okay, why do you think that is? Why do you think you are on the 5? And they'll explain it, and then somebody else will be like, oh my gosh, thank God you feel that way. I also feel that way. And it was a very sort of unifying feeling. But as I said, what I'm trying to encourage now for people in education is to be asking these questions: how are you feeling, traffic light number, scale, and then going into the academic work. And we don't have to ask why people are feeling that way, but it's just the acknowledgement and acceptance of feelings, which I think is really important. So because we were able to do this, and because we were openly speaking about sort of how we were feeling, the actual group started to get referred to as therapy, which is something so meaningful to me, because that's exactly what I wanted this project to achieve, to feel like a close-knit community where we can all talk openly and be there for one another through what was a really hard time. And my aim from the beginning was to allow these students to feel supported, because we wanted to go out and support other students. But if these students didn't feel supported, how could they do that? Like, how could they pour from a glass which was empty? So what support were we offering for other students? So as I said, we were broadcasting on a student experience, and we didn't want this to be filtered. We wanted this to be very honest. But after we did that, we wanted people to go to our socials. We had Facebook, but our main one was Instagram. And collectively, we all produced content which we hoped supported other students. There was someone who produced content about how to access counselling services in a pandemic, how to help your mental health in a pandemic. We had tips for managing anxiety, tips for helping with procrastination, why your grades don't define who you are. There was such a range of things, and a way of getting people involved so that everybody felt like they were part of a project was that I assigned people weekly content. So I said, you can go away and I want you to tailor this to you. I want this to be designed, which is something which is, you feel passionate about, and I'm going to help and support you, and I can help and support you creatively. Now, I didn't have all of the skills to do that, but I guess by, putting myself forward and having that confidence and believing that I could help, and if not, I could find the people who could help, it also gave the person who was producing this content confidence to think, okay, well, if something goes wrong, I can talk to somebody else. So we weren't always at 100% when feeling confident about what we were producing, but it was more that I might have been at 60%, they might have been at 40%, and together we were at 100% of confidence that we would produce something good. And actually it did end up that the content we were producing was really, really good. So they all went off, they produced weekly content, and this can all be found on our social pages. So if anybody does want to check out our social media now to kind of see what we have been up to, you can find us at the.pandemic podcast on Instagram, and on Facebook it's the Pandemic Podcast. If anybody has any questions about any of our findings through the podcast, if anybody has any questions with the wellbeing support we were offering, and if anybody has any questions about how to do successful group projects in the future, I will be more than happy to answer your questions. I'm sure that I can give you my university email address and you can email me. It's been absolutely lovely speaking to you today, and I hope you have a lovely summer, hopefully pandemic free very, very soon. So honestly, thank you so much.